You can't be serious. Open that gate right now, or I'll have you arrested. Those were the exact words that came flying out of Marlene's mouth, the HOA president of Willow Creek Estates, as she stood at the locked entrance of my ranch, red-faced and trembling like a kettle about to explode. Behind her stood two other board members, sheepish and unsure, clutching clipboards and iced coffees, while I stood tall just behind my fence, arms crossed, holding my ground. "No, ma'am," I said calmly, looking her dead in the eye. "This is private property. You're not welcome here." That was when Marlene lost it. Like, really lost it. She stomped the dry gravel with her heels, then spun around and whipped out her phone like a sword. "That's it. I'm calling the police. You'll be removed in handcuffs, you arrogant squatter." Squatter. I nearly laughed. I had lived on this 20-acre plot for nearly 7 years. I had title deeds, tax receipts, even photos of me building my own barn by hand. But none of that mattered to Marlene. In her mind, everything within a 10-mile radius belonged to her precious HOA, even if my ranch was legally outside the HOA boundary. She started yelling into the phone, reporting a hostile man illegally occupying land and demanding an officer come immediately for trespassing and noncompliance. The other two board members started backing away awkwardly. That's when I saw the flashing lights coming down the hill. I froze. Was she actually serious? Were the cops about to drag me off my own land? Before we get to what happened next, let me take you back a little. My name is Jack Harrison. I'm 42 years old, a retired firefighter, and I live on a peaceful ranch in northern Arizona. It's not massive, but it's mine. A solid 20 acres of open field, horses, chickens, and a whole lot of peace until Marlene moved into the HOA down the road and decided she was the queen of everything in sight. Marlene Boyd is in her late 50s, drives a pearl-white SUV the size of a boat, and wears sunglasses so big you'd think she was hiding from the FBI. She was elected HOA president last fall, and ever since then, she's been acting like a sheriff in an old western. Rules, regulations, inspections, even for homes not in the HOA. And somehow, she had convinced herself that my ranch fell under her rule book. The drama started 3 months ago when a new developer paved a fancy road connecting the HOA neighborhood to the main highway, and it passed right behind my ranch. Ever since then, HOA members started jogging near my fence, cutting through the back, and even letting their dogs poop near my porch. One day, a kid even drove a dirt bike straight through my garden. I put up private property, no trespassing signs. I installed cameras. I even built a new steel gate with a code lock. But Marlene, she wasn't having it. She left a letter in my mailbox saying I was in violation of community beautification codes. Beautification? This is a working ranch, not a golf course. At first, I ignored her. Then I sent her a polite letter with a scanned copy of my property boundaries, clearly marked as outside the HOA. She wrote back saying, the map must be outdated, and that she would be initiating an inspection next week. That inspection was the stunt you saw at the beginning of this story. That morning, I was feeding the goats when I heard tires crunching gravel. I looked up, and there was Marlene, 2 board members in tow, walking straight toward my gate like they owned the place. No heads up, no appointment, just barging in like a reality show film crew. I walked down to meet them, wiped my hands on my jeans, and stood square in front of the gate. I knew exactly what she was about to pull. She smiled at first, fake, thin, full of vinegar. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison. As per HOA Regulation 14B, we are here to conduct an external inspection of the property." "I'm not in the HOA," I replied flatly. Marlene's face twitched. "That's a gray area. The recent expansion brings new parcels under the jurisdiction." "Nope," I cut in. "Here's a fresh copy of the property deed." I held it up to the gate. Marlene didn't even look. "Open the gate, Jack." "No, ma'am." And that's when it all unraveled. Her voice went high. Her threats rolled out. And finally, she called the cops. Which brings us back to that moment. The sirens now growing louder. The gravel road shimmering with heat. The gate between us vibrating slightly from Marlene's anger. The police SUV came to a stop, and out stepped two officers. One was Officer Diaz, a young guy I'd met before when he stopped by to buy eggs. He gave me a curious look. The other was a middle-aged woman with her hand resting near her duty belt, eyes locked on me. Marlene stormed over to them. "Officers, thank God that man is trespassing and refusing lawful inspection. I'm the HOA president, and I have authority here." The female officer turned to me. "Sir, what's your name?" "Jack Harrison. I live here. Do you have ID, proof of ownership?" I handed it over without blinking. "Absolutely." She took the papers, stepped aside to read them, and that's when Marlene tried to push past the gate. "I don't need permission to inspect. This is about community safety." I grabbed the gate firmly. "You step 1 foot onto my land, and I will press charges for trespassing." The officers both turned to look, and right at that moment, boom. A loud crash echoed from behind Marlene. One of her board members had accidentally backed their car into my mailbox while trying to leave. Marlene spun around furious. The officers stepped in. Everyone stopped moving. Officer Diaz shouted. I stood still, waiting, silent, because now the cops were fully involved. My fence was damaged, and Marlene was still shouting orders like she was in charge of the state. But something unexpected was about to happen next. Something Marlene had definitely not planned for. And just as the female officer looked up from my paperwork, something shifted in her expression. She narrowed her eyes and turned to Marlene with a different tone entirely. "Ma'am, I need to ask you a few questions. That's where we'll pick it up next. But before we go any further, tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to know where my fellow freedom lovers and ranch protectors are tuning in from. Stay with me. Things are about to get even wilder." The female officer, whose name tag read Sergeant Willis, stepped forward slowly and turned to face Marlene. Her tone was calm, but something in it had shifted, like a teacher who just caught a student cheating during a test. "Ma'am, I'd like to clarify a few things," she said firmly. "You claim this property falls under your HOA's authority. Can you show me any documentation to support that?" Marlene blinked. For a moment, the confidence drained from her face. "Well, the expansion plan was submitted to the council, and we're still waiting on final confirmation. But so, you don't have legal jurisdiction over this property at this time?" Sergeant Willis pressed. "I mean, not yet, but it's in progress." Sergeant Willis raised an eyebrow. "That's not how the law works, ma'am. You can't enforce rules on land you don't legally oversee." Marlene's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Her two board members were now huddled near the SUV, pretending to scroll through their phones like they weren't part of the circus. "Jack Harrison," Officer Diaz said as he stepped toward me, handing back my papers. "Everything checks out. You're not part of the HOA. You're well outside their boundary according to county zoning, and we have no record of any changes submitted or approved." I nodded quietly, relieved, but staying composed. "Now," Sergeant Willis continued, "you said this woman," she pointed at Marlene, "attempted to gain access to your private land, then called in a false trespassing report." "She did," I confirmed, "and her friend over there just knocked over my mailbox." Sergeant Willis turned toward the man who had bumped into the post. "Sir, stay where you are. We'll need a statement." Marlene finally snapped. "This is outrageous. I'm the president of the Willow Creek HOA. Do you know how many homes I oversee? I demand you remove this man from the property." Sergeant Willis held up a hand. "You're not in charge here. This is a private citizen's property, and you've trespassed. You're lucky Mr. Harrison hasn't pressed charges. I could feel it rising in my chest. Vindication, relief, and yes, a little bit of amusement. But I kept my face straight. Marlene was fuming. She looked like she might burst into flames. I'll sue. She snapped. I'll have his land condemned. Officer Diaz let out a breath. Ma'am, please take a step back before this gets worse. And then, just as she turned toward her car in frustration, she screamed, "You'll regret this, Jack. This isn't over." The officers made sure everyone left the property. The board members shuffled away quietly, and Marlene drove off in a cloud of dust, tires screeching like a bad movie scene. After they were gone, Sergeant Willis stayed behind a few minutes longer. She leaned against her SUV and looked at me. "She's the kind who always thinks she can bully people, huh?" she said. "Every day," I sighed. "Do you want to file a formal trespassing complaint?" I thought about it. I really did. But I shook my head. Not yet. I just want her to stay away from my land. That's all. Sergeant Willis nodded. "Well, you've got your paperwork in order, and we've logged the incident. If she ever tries this again, don't hesitate to call, and get that mailbox fixed." I chuckled. You got it. When they left, I finally breathed. It had been a long, hot, tense morning. I walked over to the smashed mailbox, picked up the dented metal box inside. Another chore for the weekend. That evening, I sat on my porch sipping iced tea and watching the sun go down behind the hills. My horses grazed peacefully. The goats were quiet. For the first time in weeks, it felt like things were back to normal, at least for a few hours. Because around 9 p.m., as I was locking up the barn, I saw a shadow move along the side fence. I froze, my hand gripping the flashlight. Someone was out there. I clicked on the beam and pointed it toward the noise. A shape ducked behind a bush near the back gate. I walked slowly toward it, heart thumping. When I got closer, I could see the figure better. It was a man in a dark jacket crouched low, trying to stay hidden. "Hey," I barked. "You better come out before I call the police." He didn't move. I took another step forward and raised the flashlight higher when suddenly he jumped the fence and sprinted toward the road, vanishing into the night. I stared after him, stunned. What the hell? The next morning, I checked the security camera footage. What I saw made my stomach twist. The man had come from the direction of the HOA neighborhood, and in his hand, clear as day, was a folder labeled zoning requisition. What was the HOA planning now? And why sneak around in the dark with zoning paperwork? Something wasn't right. And I had a bad feeling this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The next morning, I didn't waste a second. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, sat down at my kitchen table, and went frame by frame through my camera footage from the night before. The intruder was dressed in black, wearing a bald cap pulled low over his face. But I caught a side profile as he paused to check the folder in his hand. That was when my gut twisted again. The man wasn't just any stranger. He looked like one of the HOA board members. Specifically, a guy named Todd Brennan. Tall, narrow shoulders, thinning hair, always wearing those ugly square glasses like he was stuck in the 90s. Todd was the HOA secretary and Marlene's loyal little foot soldier. I zoomed in. It wasn't the best image, but it was enough. The grainy shot showed his build, his posture, and the folder labeled zoning requisition, the same kind of document Marlene had hinted at during her fake inspection. This wasn't just some nosy neighbor. This was organized and worse. This was illegal. Now, I'm not the type to go crying wolf. I've always believed in handling things man to man, but this crossed a line. So, I printed the clearest screenshot, placed it in a folder with my property deed and footage log, and drove down to the county sheriff's office that same afternoon. The deputy at the front desk, Sheriff Cole, recognized me right away. "Jack," he said, sipping from a chipped mug. "You finally got tired of Marlene, huh?" I raised an eyebrow. "You know about her?" He chuckled. "Oh, yeah. You're not the first rancher she's messed with." I handed him the file. "Then you're going to want to see this." He flipped through the folder, paused on the screenshot, and let out a low whistle. "You're saying this guy was trespassing last night?" "Caught him on my cameras," I said. "And he wasn't just taking a walk. He had HOA zoning documents in hand, sneaking around after dark." Sheriff Cole's face tightened. "That's serious, especially if they're trying to fabricate claims against your land." "I don't trust them," I said. "They already sent the cops to my gate once. Now they're creeping around my ranch in the dead of night." "I'll open a formal investigation," he said. "We'll pull security feeds from the neighborhood entrance and match them to your footage. If he entered your land without permission, that's criminal trespassing." I left the office feeling not better exactly. But at least I had someone watching my back now. Sheriff Cole had a reputation for fairness, and he wasn't the kind to get pushed around by a bunch of clipboard-waving HOA elites. But the peace didn't last. 3 days later, I was back in my barn fixing the chicken coop when I heard it again. The crunch of tires on gravel. I stepped outside, and there she was, Marlene, back again. But this time, she wasn't alone. She had brought a man with her. Tall, sharp suit, slick back hair, carrying a briefcase like it was a weapon. He looked me up and down like I was a grease stain on his Italian leather shoes. "Mr. Harrison," he said smoothly. "My name is Wesley Grant. I represent the Willow Creek Homeowners Association." I crossed my arms. "Not interested." He held up a document. "We're here to deliver a cease and desist." I laughed out loud. "For what?" "Unlawful obstruction of community right-of-way access," he said without blinking. "That's a lie," I snapped. "This is private land. There's no right-of-way across my ranch, and you know it." Marlene stepped in smug. "Jack, let's not make this harder than it has to be. Just remove the gate. Let us through. A walking trail from the community would raise property values for everyone, including you." "Except I'm not in your community," I snapped. "And I don't want dog walkers and cyclists cutting across my pasture. This is a working ranch. My livestock could get hurt or worse." Wesley adjusted his tie. "We're giving you 7 days to comply. After that, we'll file an injunction." I narrowed my eyes. "You really want to go down that road?" Wesley's smirk didn't move. "We're confident the judge will rule in our favor." I watched as they turned and walked back to their car. Same pearl white SUV, same smug exit, but I wasn't going to wait for their legal trickery to catch up with me. That night, I emailed Sheriff Cole again and sent a copy of the cease and desist. His reply came quick. "Do not remove the gate. They have no authority. I'll have a county surveyor out tomorrow to verify your boundaries. Sit tight." The next morning, just as promised, a dusty county truck pulled up my drive. A man named Frank Rivera stepped out, survey marker in hand and a weathered folder under his arm. We spent the next 3 hours walking every line of my property. He marked corners, cross-referenced old county maps, and even pulled up drone images from last spring. By the time he was done, his voice was firm. "They don't have a case," he said. "You're 2 full plots outside the HOA. Your gate is 100% legal. There's no existing right-of-way." I felt a surge of relief, but that joy was short-lived. That very night, I got a knock on my door. It was nearly 11 p.m. I opened it slowly, hand resting on the bat I kept by the door. And standing there was Marlene. She was shaking,